Hey, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. It's time for question and answer episode 13. Well, today's question and answer is episode 13, and today I've got 5 important questions about gardening. They tend to be long-winded, so there's gonna be a lot of lecture. I'll try to keep the visuals interesting for you and show you some examples, but we're going to talk about some important matters, and then at the end I'll have kind of a humorous question that came up recently, and I hope you enjoy. So let's get on to the questions. One question I've got repeatedly is, do I grow hybrids or heirlooms? And people often wonder, well, I see real gardeners, the real gardeners out there, and they grow heirlooms because that's kind of the essence of gardening. You get these old varieties that you can't get elsewhere, and well, you just grow heirlooms because they're so good, they taste good. Well, that's true. Heirlooms are wonderful things, but let's talk about these hybrid versus heirloom. This debate. What is a hybrid? What is a species? What does it mean when we're talking about a hybrid? When you have a plant, all of our vegetables, whether they're hybrids or heirlooms, have been bred to where they are today. 500 years ago, carrots didn't look like they look today. They were pathetic looking things. We had to breed carrots and cross-pollinate and select throughout the breeding process and select for traits that were genetically better for what we want. We want a big, thick root, so we had to select for our big root. And once that selection became stable, then people began to select for other traits and characteristics, like color, like flavor, like disease resistance. And so a hybrid is just a plant that has been bred and selected through the generations for certain traits. An heirloom is just a hybrid that's been stabilized. It's a hybrid. It was bred to be a Cherokee purple. It was bred to be an Amana orange tomato. Whatever you have is a stable hybrid. And the only thing that really makes it an heirloom is the fact that it's got a story behind it, or it's got a reputation behind it, or it's been around a very long time and has been classified as an heirloom. But it was bred to be that way. And so, yeah, I grow hybrids I'm going to grow hybrids this year in my garden, in my tomato garden. I'm going to grow hybrids that are selected for certain traits that I have here, like heat and disease resistance, and I'm going to see how they compare to previous years when I didn't grow anything but heirlooms, and I expect I'll get better performance. So don't let the heirloom hybrid debate sway you. If you want to grow some hybrids, man, grow some hybrids. If you want to grow some heirlooms and some storied old classics, grow those too. Don't let the heirloom snobs make you feel like you're not a real gardener just because you're growing a hybrid. I had a question on my pruning peppers video, which surprisingly is one of my oldest videos, but it's my best video even to this day. It's controversial. Some people love it, some people hate it, but that makes for good YouTube stats. Anyway, Bojo Perez asks, do you still replant peppers into a larger pot? He's asking, do you up-pot your peppers? In the video, I show a pepper a pepper plant in a small container. And so I've grown them from seed, I've transplanted them into that small container, and it's a small yogurt-sized container. Do I pot them up from there? Yes. So potting up is always something you want to do. I want to give you some principles of potting up plants. Once your plants start to get green and bushy, and that bushiness looks about the same size as the pot, in other words, if you could visualize taking a plant and pulling it out of the pot and turning it upside down, if the greenery will fit easily into that pot, then it's the right size pot. If your greenery is getting a little bit larger, it means your root system is large too. The roots of a plant generally are actually a little bit larger than the green area of the plant itself, and so you'll want to pot them up. I have an example right here. This is a pepper plant. This is one of the ones that I pruned, so you can see it's got many branches down there where we pruned it, and you can see the size of the pot is about the size of the greenery here. This pepper is thriving. It's doing well. You can see that I've trimmed off. I don't know that you can see, but I have trimmed off some of the main growing stems to keep this pepper plant small because I'm not planning on moving it out of this pot anytime soon. And it's beginning to put on a whole bunch of flowers and blossoms, and some of them look like they've been pollinated and are putting on little peppers. So yeah, I'm pleased with this. But that's about the size of the pot that I would use for that size of a plant. If this plant were to get any larger, if I were to allow it to grow larger, then I would put it in a larger pot. Let me show you one. Here's a pepper plant that I should pot up. You can see that this pepper goes all the way up to the top of the screen there. And if I pulled this plant out of here and turned it upside down and tried to put it into this pot, it's just about too big to really fit in there comfortably. This is also a very old plant. This plant is 2 or 3 years old. You can see it's kind of gnarled and eaten up by leaf miners, and it's lived a hard life. But if I want this plant to survive into the next season and come out with real nice, lush, new growth, I probably should pot it up and put it into a, this is about a 3-gallon container. I'd probably put it into a 5 to 7-gallon container with fresh soil, nice amendments, and then I could expect this plant to do well. So if you're going to grow vegetables in pots, always try to keep them potted in a container that's about the right size, about the size of the canopy you intend to keep of your plant. If you're going to have a very large plant, you'll probably need a larger pot. And with perennials and things like trees, you want to keep those trees small so that they're appropriately sized. There's a book by Ann Ralph, and the book's name is Grow a Small Fruit Tree. And in that, she talks about growing fruit trees in pots and keeping them small, keeping the container size appropriate for your plant. That's a good book if you're growing things like fruit trees or perennials. You can even benefit from that book if you just grow in perennial vegetables. So this fruit tree is just about too big for that pot. It's just over the limit. I will pot this fruit tree up as soon as the fruit is harvested, and that citrus tree will go into a little bit larger pot. You can see if I take that plant with that mass right there, that canopy right there, and I pull it out and try to stuff it down into the pot, well, I could get it in there, but it's going to be uncomfortable and crowded in there. And so that root system down there is just slightly larger than that canopy, all that greenage and foliage there. So that tree needs a bigger pot. Now, uppotting is important for keeping your plants healthy and keeping their root systems healthy. But if you're not growing a perennial, if you're just growing an annual, like this cabbage right here, I've got this cabbage in this pot. I don't have to uppot this cabbage any further than that because, well, once it gets big enough, I'm just going to harvest it at the end of a few months. And so I'm not trying to keep the plant growing in this pot for a long period of time. I can grow a cabbage, although not a big one. I can grow a cabbage in this pot right here. This is a 3-gallon pot for 1 head of cabbage. And if I fertilize this and give that plant what it needs, even though it's going to get root bound, so long as I'm fertilizing and letting that plant have all that it needs in this tiny pot, it's going to give me a head of lettuce, and then I pull it out and I'm done. But that's different than if you're trying to grow a perennial plant, a pepper plant that you're going to keep running for a couple of years, a fruit tree, a fig tree, a citrus tree. With that, you need to track with the size of the plant and keep your plant to fit into an appropriate sized pot. Yeah, keep your pot about the size of the canopy and your plant should do good. Heather asks about soil fertility. She wants to get a better understanding of fertilizers and amendments. How often do you add them? How much to add? What to add? Things like that. She started using Miracle-Gro all-purpose and has been happy with it, but started to notice some things coming up in her garden which caused her to question fertility. Minerals too. How do you know what minerals and how do you do that? So yeah, fertility, you know, it's a thing that people often argue about, and a lot of people say all you have to do is add compost to your soil every year and you'll be fine. Well, that's pretty much what I've done here. Is I'll add compost to my soil. I'll use a little bit of mineralizing stuff like azomite, but how do you really know? Let's talk about that. Now that pea tastes as good as anything I've ever eaten. That's a delicious pea, and the fact that I grew it in my garden makes it even more delicious. But is it the healthiest pea I could possibly grow? I have no clue. I don't know. I have to have a soil test. soil fertility can be tracked by having a soil test. If you have soil and your plants are not thriving, growing plants, and you want to know what's in here, then I strongly suggest two things. First, get a soil test. But before you do that, read Steve Solomon's book, The Intelligent Gardener. Yes, it's a difficult read because it gets very technical, but read the parts that aren't so technical, and read the introduction and the first several chapters, and understand really what makes good soil. Most gardeners really don't understand what makes good soil. I didn't understand what makes good soil for the longest time. I just thought, well, if I just keep adding organic material, we're going to be fine. Some people grow just in pure compost. The sheet gardeners and the mulch gardeners and the back to Eden method, these are all valid methods of gardening, but are they sustainable? And then the other question is, are they growing the best quality food you can possibly grow? Well, you have to test your soil and see what you're lacking. What most plants lack in a garden like mine is mineralization. They lack the minerals they need to be very healthy, good, nutritious plants. Now they grow great, they taste great, and that's where us gardeners were ignorant of what we're lacking because, well, everything works. But as Heather found out, sometimes you start getting a pest problem. Sometimes all of a sudden your plants take a turn for the worse and you don't know why. That's when a soil test can come in handy. And if you don't follow Steve Solomon's book to the letter, at least get a soil test and have your local ag extension office, if you have one, have them walk you through that. At the bare minimum, read a few books and articles about soil and what makes up good soil, and kind of compare that to what you've been doing. So you can know if your soil is healthy enough to grow good plants if you grow good plants. These cabbages are fantastic. They're doing great. The lettuce over there is looking beautiful. Everything in my garden this fall is performing amazingly well. But do I have enough mineralization in there to give me the nutritious food that I really want? I don't know yet. This coming spring I will be doing some soil testing, and I'm going to find out after 6 years of these beds being amended with compost, chiefly compost, I'm going to find out what am I lacking in here. The way you find out is, first of all, look at your plants. Second of all, get a soil test. And third, find out about what it means, the stuff that comes back on your soil test. Find out what you lack, and then put that in your soil. Well, there's a look in my compost pile. That's what I've got in there right now. Lots of greens on top. I harvested my sweet potatoes, and I put them all in here and chopped everything up. So this is a bunch of sweet potato vine, all my lettuce backups that I don't need anymore. They're in there along with the soil and compost. A lot of paper shredded paper. Yeah, so all of these sweet potatoes though, what if I had diseased plants? I got a question about adding diseased plants to your compost. Cesar Lopez asks, is it actually that bad to put diseased plants into a compost pile? Some say you should never put sick or diseased plants in a compost pile to avoid spreading diseases. Other people say, well, those diseases are already in the soil. So he asks, is keeping clean compost really that big of a deal? Yeah, yes and no. There's nuances, as usual. It's not a simple answer. If you know you have a diseased plant, it's got a soil-borne disease, or it's got a virus, you might not want to put those things in your compost pile just as a matter of conscience, just so you're not concentrating things in that pile. The other issue is that if you compost, but you do a kind of a passive composting, and you're not very actively turning your pile and making sure that it heats up to the requisite temperatures, then you're gonna have some risk there. Some pathogens might make it through, and you're just going to put them back in your garden. Now, yes, people say, well, those pathogens are already in the garden. It's true. But the question is, do you really want to concentrate them, especially if you know they're there? Do you want to concentrate them in your garden? Because if you had a virus, or if you had nematodes in a crop, nematodes are a good example because they'll disappear if you're not feeding them over time, or they will diminish over time. Their population will be reduced. And so if you know you have a nematode problem, then plant your next crop of that kind of crop, rotate it to a different position in your garden for a year or two, and those nematodes that are already in your garden will begin to diminish because they're not feeding on your plants anymore. Why would you then take those nematode infested plants from last year, put them in your compost pile, and then reintroduce them into your garden again. It just doesn't make sense to me to knowingly compost diseased plants. In this compost pile, I get temperatures up to 160 or so, and if anything is hovering around 140, 150, 160 for a day or two, it's going to die. Whatever's in there is going to die. But the edges of my compost pile don't get up to that temperature. And so when I turn my compost pile and stir it around, well, it's a process and it's hard work and it takes a while. And I'm not always efficient with it. And so sometimes I'll turn it and it'll heat up again. And I'll kill off the pathogens that were around the edges. But I don't think any of us are as confident in our efficiency with mixing this stuff up as we turn our compost, confident enough to say, yeah, we killed everything in there. And so for me, it just doesn't make sense to throw diseased plants in here. A commenter called Registered User asks, is it necessary to replant lettuce that was grown from seeds in big pots? And the reason Registered User is asking is seeds were planted 1/4 inch below the dirt, just as specified on the packet, but they grew leggy and tall and spindly, and they would never have been able to support the mass at the top of the plant. So he ended up, or she, I don't know which, ended up digging up and replanting all the seedlings so that only the leaves were above the soil. Is it normal to do this with lettuce? Yeah, lettuce, it's a weird thing. You don't really have to worry about that spindly long stalk. The way lettuce grows is it does send up a shoot, and it does grow. Cabbage does this too, even radishes. Most of these brassicas and some of these leafy plants like that, they'll grow a long vine when they sprout, and you'll think, well, how can that ever grow a head of lettuce? How can that support the weight of a head? But what they'll do is once they start to leaf out and form that head, they kind of stop growing, and that thing's laying on the ground, and from the point where they decide to start bushing out, that's where they'll support themselves from. Let me show you an example, a pretty extreme one. Check this guy out. This is a romaine lettuce, and it was grown from seed, and it was long and spindly just like the ones over there. And I thought, well, that guy's not going to stand up, but he did. Look, nice taut lettuce plant standing straight up, starting to grow into a head. But check this out. It's not connected to the ground. Look at that big long runner. This was so spindly that when it was planted in this cell, it flopped over and grew into this cell. And once it decided to grow vertically, it just stopped at that point and started putting on growth upward, and the ground is supporting it just fine. So lettuce, you don't really have to worry when you transplant lettuce, or if you plant it as seeds and it comes up and lays down and gives a big runner like that. When it's ready, it'll turn around and start to head up like this. This is another good example. This is a head of romaine lettuce. It's starting to head up. I could eat these leaves. In fact, I've been picking some. But this guy was planted and grew a long stem as well. And you can see just when he decided to go vertical, he just turned and started growing, and that stem beefed up. So that's the way they grow. There's some over there. These guys are laying down because of the wind. We had a cold front come through and really knocked down my garden. You can see this head of lettuce is looking sad. It got knocked down, but you can see wherever it falls, it starts to turn and go vertical again. So they'll correct themselves. They will recover. I was in a good stream, David the Good's live stream the other day, and there was discussions about the clothing David had on that night. Someone asked about his shirt, and he got to talking about gardener style and how he's trying to up his game with gardener style, because see, David has a particular style, a particular look, and some of that includes hats made out of mostly duct tape by now, but also he's got some really nice hats. And we started talking about style, and somebody in there, I don't remember who you were, but somebody said, oh yeah, that black Gumbo guy, he's got style because he wears a cowboy hat. No, I don't wear a cowboy hat. That is not a cowboy hat. That's a fedora. And so I wanted to really kind of show the difference between a cowboy hat and the kinds of hats that I wear. So I went and asked a friend, First of all, like I said, I'm not a cowboy. I live in the suburbs, and I don't have any need for a cowboy hat. Cowboys generally work with cows, or they work in agriculture on giant tracts of land like this one right here in the oldest part of Texas right here. They work outdoors a lot. I couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting the borders of my garden. My garden is small. I don't need a cowboy hat to protect me from windstorms, rain, and all kinds of sun beating down on me. I just need a hat to go out in the garden and want to wear around town that I like. So the thing I wear is this right here is a Outback hat by Dorfman Pacific. It's a crushable felt hat. I've had it for years. It's my favorite hat, but it's not a cowboy hat. I do have some fedoras that I wear. I like to wear a fedora, and I wear a fedora because I like the style of a fedora. But a fedora, even if I'm wearing a flannel shirt and got leather gloves on working in the dirt, does not make it a cowboy hat.
Cartwright. Okay, well, Hoss Cartwright of Bonanza of old, and Dan Blocker was his name. He's dead now, but nonetheless, he wore an old, just raw cowboy hat. The bill was shaped a little bit, the brim was shaped a little bit, but the crown was just round.
He had that dome top,
yep,
right? Yeah.
He had that dome top. Well, the reason for that is he only had 3 holes in it, but it gave him more airflow up there in the crown of the hat instead of being shaped like this one is, whereby, it sits closer to your head. And if you notice on mine, then you've got all the airflow, because I sweat a lot and I need the airflow in my head during the summer. Whereas during the winter, as what we just discussed with a winter hat, then you don't want all the air holes. We got 3 little holes in it on a felt hat, which keeps the heat in, because you lose about 60% of your heat, or your body heat, out of your head and your feet. So awesome. It's functionality.
So it's a functional working man's hat who works a place like this. Absolutely. With lots of trees, lots of stuff to do, versus a guy who works in a suburban backyard.
And so from that standpoint, then I've got another one that I'll just run around casual with, and then I've got my work hat that's just twisted out of shape and all kind of different things. So,
and we heard you want to burn that hat.
Yeah, she would like to.
I've done that a couple of times.
So just wanted to clear that up. Gardener style. I guess it's a real thing. So there you go. That's the difference between a cowboy hat and not a cowboy hat. I don't wear a cowboy hat. Got nothing against them, just it's not for me. So, hey, thanks for joining us on Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. There's another question and answer in the bag. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We're aiming for 100,000 subscribers, and we just hit 80,000 just today, so I'm so grateful and humbled. Y'all have happy gardening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.